What's up, guys? Welcome back for another episode at Rangers Review. By far the craziest, and we thought the last episode just a couple days ago was going to be the craziest, but no, this season has had quite the whirlwinds. It has easily been the most hectic, the most bizarre, the most outrageous season that the Rangers have been able to come up with all these different factors in a 56-game year. God forbid if this was a full 82-game year. It is not, luckily. We have so much to unwind. We are going to do that for a special episode of Rangers Review, but not so special in a positive way. We have a lot that we're going to be getting into. You guys know why you clicked on this. We apologize for this being a day or two late, just given our schedules. No one expected what happened to happen. So, Steven, before we get into anything today, how are you doing, my friend?
I don't know. I don't know what to think, what to feel. I woke up this morning thinking I had a bad dream and then realized that it wasn't. It's everything that happened in the last 72 hours is just crazy. We go from Tom Wilson acting like a criminal to him getting away with it, to the Rangers making a statement, which I was fully on board with, to then the Rangers getting fined $250,000 for that statement, which is ridiculous. And then we played in a game yesterday where all bets were off. Buchnevich ends up with a one-game suspension. Gorton and Davidson are fired. What the hell's going on?
Let's backtrack, Steven, because we're going to break all these down one by one, okay? So let's start off with this Rangers statement. So as you guys know, over the past day or so, Rangers came out with a very detailed statement really calling out the NHL and Tom Wilson and George Parros and why he is deserving, why he should not be the head of the NHLPA anymore for his lack of competence as the leader in suspending finding players when he himself is a goon. We've been over this before, but from our previous recording, we didn't know for sure if anything would come out with Wilson and what should have been a clear suspension on Artemi Panarin for what he did to him, manhandled him. I don't care what you guys have to say. There's nothing that can justify that in the game of hockey today, or has been for years now for that matter, and nothing was done of it. It was just a 5K suspension on Pavel Buchnevich. So the Rangers go balls in and do something that no team has done in NHL's history to this extent. They give a thorough statement calling out the NHL for their incompetence, Tom Wilson and George Parros. And in doing so, this led to a trickle-down effect beyond words, truly beyond words. And Steven, is there anything that you would like to add regarding this statement before we get on to what exactly are the repercussions of what has transpired here?
Yeah, I'll quickly read through the statement so people know what's in there. So the statement of the New York Rangers are extremely disappointed that Capitals forward Tom Wilson was not suspended for his horrifying act of violence last night at Madison Square Garden. The fact that they refer to it as a horrifying act of violence shows you how the Rangers feel about this.
Exactly.
Wilson is a repeat offender with a long history of these type of acts, and we find it shocking that the NHL and their Department of Player Safety failed to take the appropriate action and suspend him indefinitely. Wilson's dangerous and reckless actions caused an injury to Artemi Panarin that will prevent him from playing again this season. We view this as a dereliction of duty by NHL Head of Player Safety, George Parros, and believe he is unfit to continue in his current role. So they are calling out the NHL. They are basically saying George Parros is not suited for his position. He should be fired. And this is a guy, George Parros, this is a guy who has a clothing line that promotes violence in hockey. Let's get that straight. He was a goon when he was on the ice. He's not the right guy to put in that position. But they had Brendan Shanahan in the past who was actually doing a good job in that position. When there was no suspension, we still got videos explaining why there was no suspension. Now all we get is a video explaining when there is a suspension, and it's not George Parros. It's just a video. When in the past it was Brendan Shanahan in a studio addressing the people watching the video. The Rangers took a risk, but they stand up for their players. I'm not sure how Davidson and Gorton felt about this, but I do know that the players are 100% behind this statement because the Rangers stand up for their players with this. They get fined $250,000, which is more than the Sharks were fined with in 2015. Back in 2015, Rafi Torres was suspended for 41 games, and the San Jose Sharks in a public statement disagreed with the ruling. They didn't call for anyone to get fired. They disagreed with the ruling. That statement back then by the Sharks got them a $100,000 fine. So I expected this fine to be more than $100,000. It turned out to be $250,000. My first response to the fine is worth it. Do it again. I mean, pay the NHL $500K and make another statement. This should not be. You shouldn't be fined for speaking up and trying to protect your players. But then again, this is the culture that North American hockey has to deal with. And I said this earlier today on Twitter. This is not a hockey problem. This is a hockey in North America problem. These issues do not happen in the Swedish league or the Finnish league, even the Russian league.
And you would know.
I watched these games. Rangers prospect Adam Edstrom at the beginning of the season was suspended for, I think, 5 or 6 games for a hit to the head. Doesn't matter if it's intentional or not. Hit to the head is a standard suspension. Whether you are a repeat offender or not doesn't matter. And by doing so, they have eradicated those type of hits from hockey. Hockey is a safer sport for it. The NHL just doesn't care about player safety. And there was a quote from a general manager about this whole thing, and I'm gonna read the quote. I don't think what Wilson did was a suspendable act. I think that statement is part of the problem with society right now. Everyone wants everyone to be fired. That isn't how it works, and that's not how you do it. George has the worst job in hockey. On every decision, one team is happy and one team is pissed. See, this I already disagree with, because it wasn't just one team that was pissed with this. There were fans and people affiliated with other teams, Islanders, Devils, Penguins, Bruins. They were all shocked that Tom Wilson got away with this. There are former NHL players like Dan Carcillo, John Scott, Jeremy Roenick,
Sean Avery,
who came out with a statement basically criticizing the NHL and the Department of Player Safety for the way they dealt with this. But the problem is that neither the owners nor the general managers nor the league care about player safety. They've proven that time and again. What bugs me the most is that the NHLPA, the Players Association, seemingly doesn't care either, which is weird because they are the players. There's a problem in hockey in North America, specifically in the NHL, that this league is run by people who used to play hockey in the 70s and 80s when things were different. But life was different then. You know, when women who were pregnant in the 70s and 80s smoked cigarettes, they don't do that anymore either. Times change with science and testing and you know, you find out things that you learn from and you adjust accordingly. When the first cars were invented, there were no seatbelts. Now there are seatbelts in every car and it's mandatory. I can go on and on giving you examples, but the point is the owners and the general managers and the people that run the league are still stuck in the 1970s and 1980s. And it's not going to change. And it's awful that we're probably going to have to wait for someone to be paralyzed for falling neck first on the ice, or maybe even worse, before something changes. And it's ridiculous.
Yeah. And I want to add too how the issue here is the NHL promoted this, and we're going to be getting into the game shortly. That transpired in the last game between the Rangers and the Capitals, but they promoted this. It makes you wonder how much incentive was there that, oh, the Rangers coincidentally were going last night at the time recording this, at least, were on a Wednesday night rivalry game on NBC Sports against the Capitals. It really makes you wonder that if that was not the case, if maybe this wasn't a rivalry game, would anything be different? That's what I want to know, because I think that I have a solid answer as to that. I think we all do too. Everyone chimed into that game. Didn't matter if you were a hockey fan.
And last night's game, it started off with 3 fights off the face-off, which was predictable. Look, I like physical hockey, and if there is a fight here or there, I enjoy it because, it's part of the entertainment. What I do not like is when there are staged fights like this. You have 3 fights straight off the face-off. I mean, where's the excitement in that? It was when Smith went after Tom Wilson, you could sense that everyone in the arena was like, okay, this we understand. But those 3 fights in the first 2 seconds of the game, meaningless. But you could tell that the entire game, the Rangers were trying to prove a point. And they crossed the line. Buchnevich got a game misconduct and a major penalty for high-sticking, cross-checking Anthony Mantha in the face.
And that led to a 1-game suspension, which is still more than what Tom Wilson got.
Look, in a vacuum, Pavel Buchnevich getting a 1-game suspension is the right call. Because it was an unnecessary thing to do.
It was wrong what he did. It's just the hypocrisy that we're pointing out here.
He targeted a player away from the puck. Game misconduct and a 1-game suspension. Nothing to complain about. What it does highlight is how inconsistent the NHL is, because this gets a 1-game suspension. Gostisbehere gets a 2-game suspension for cross-checking an opponent in the back, which. During open play, but Tom Wilson gets away with what he did to Buchnevich and Panarin. Connor McDavid shoves Nils Höglander's face into the ice, gets away with it. Sidney Crosby does the same thing to Travis Konechny, gets away with it. There is something seriously wrong with this league where there's just no consistency. And the referees yesterday were the referees we should have had on Monday. There were many. Ryan Strome fought Lars Eller, and I think Anthony Bitetto fought someone else as well.
Yes,
Michael. Fine, it wasn't as bad as the Islanders Penguins game in 2011. If you remember that one,
I do.
That was bad. It wasn't that bad. It was bad for the time we're in, 2021. It was a pretty bad game, but. Yeah, it was. This is what you can expect when the league doesn't take action. When you have a Department of Player Safety, your teams and your players should be able to rely on that department to police the game for you. This is, and I know that some old school hockey people will say, no, players should police the game themselves. Yeah, that's not the case. You don't police the game yourself when there's a Department of Player Safety in charge. But the Department of Player Safety is incompetent. But what it comes down to is this: the NHL is run by people with an outdated mindset. And I don't know, maybe they have brain damage themselves from too many hits to the head. I don't know.
Well, you let me know, because George Peros is the one who controls a lot of this. I highly doubt that man is fully competent.
Yeah, but having George Peros in that position is one thing. Having general managers come out to defend George Peros, that just amplifies the problem the NHL has.
Absolutely, and you need to talk. You need to take a hard look at which general managers exactly are these.
It's a much wider problem than just George Peros, and for some reason, these general managers that say these things decide to remain anonymous. I mean, if you stand behind your opinion, be a man. And reveal yourself. Be a man.
You don't want bad PR. God forbid. No, you can't do that.
Add your name to that statement. Be a man. Add your name to that statement. But they won't.
No, they're schmucks. So,
I guess deep down inside they know they're wrong. But I'm all for physical hockey. And I have no problem with physical hockey. I have no problem with a player once or twice going too far with a hit, where there's a little bit too much force in a hit and it results in a major penalty. That happens. But again, I keep coming back to what I said in our last recording. What Tom Wilson did had nothing to do with hockey. It was after the whistle, first of all. And what he did had nothing to do with hockey. He was defending himself to a point, but then he took it too far. And that should have been the suspension. He shouldn't have been suspended for standing up for himself when Panarin jumped on his back. That's fine. But when he pulled him down by his hair, that's where he crossed the line. Then Panarin goes down, and then he punches him in the face when he's in a defensive position. That's too far. What he did to Buchnevich, too far. But he gets away with a ridiculously low fine of $5,000. I did the math. Compared to his average annual value contract, Tom Wilson got fined 0.09% of his annual salary. That is, to put that into perspective, that's the equivalent of a $27 fine for someone earning $30K a year. That's the equivalent of the fine that Tom Wilson got for what he did to Buchnevich. This league has a problem, and it's not gonna get fixed. Not in the next few years.
No, and
there's going to need to be a change of ownership, a change of direction, and it's not going to happen until these old school guys are out of office. But by then, I'm afraid we're going to replace them with, unfortunately, guys that are now in the league, like, types like Tom Wilson and Wayne Simmons. And can you imagine if guys like Milan Lucic and Wayne Simmons are in charge? It's just going to be the same thing all over again.
Yeah, it's going to be renewed, but it's going to be this continuous cycle of a circle, just rotating and rotating and rotating. There's no branch off for something to change.
Yeah, it's a continuous cycle of dumb decisions made by dumb people.
And I think this is a perfect segue now, because I have plenty that I'm going to share on regarding the Rangers and that game in particular, really focusing on their retaliation. But before we get that towards the end of here, because this will be a shorter episode today, we need to highlight here what is the exact reason why we're talking for the most part. I know the statement and the fine are important, and I also think that they plenty coincide with what we're about to discuss that we all know about. So yesterday, at the time of recording this, guys, I wasn't feeling good. I was taking a nap, something I normally don't do, literally a 45-minute nap. I wake up, I go on my phone as I usually do, checking my Twitter notifications, and the first thing I see is Elliot Friedman, and one, I make sure it's verified to make sure it's not fake, because I thought it was. I sat there for a solid 5 minutes, and I thought it was fake. To see breaking that James Dolan, the owner of the New York Rangers, and of course the New York Knicks, because MSG, fired John Davidson, president of the New York Rangers, and GM Jeff Gorton. And when I first saw that, I truly thought I was in a dream, waking up from a nightmare. Okay, let's snap out of this right now, please. And I'm not exaggerating whatsoever. The timing of this all was terrible. And when I came to quickly realize that this was in fact a reality, I was gutted. I'm still gutted as we are talking right now. Luckily, Chris Drury is now the new GM and president of the New York Rangers. If Chris Drury was not in the New York Rangers organization, I would probably be screaming on the top of my lungs right now. Rangers fans like us are fortunate that we have such an intelligent mind still with this Rangers organization as the assistant GM. But to find the statement, to have James Dolan and the reasoning, quote, from himself, that this was strictly a performance issue and that changes need to be made. And we thank JD and Jeff for all their contributions that they've done to this Rangers prior to yesterday's game as well. Remember, guys, earlier in the day, for James Dolan to do this, for a team that is notorious, a original 16 that cares about PR and how they look, that is all just completely out the door by this. And for them to even have the audacity of saying that this statement, one way or another, is not in connection, even with James Dolan supposedly being the main driver of this, not Jeff Gorton and John Davidson, according to numerous reports, in my mind, it's still an absolute joke, because there was not a tipping point that didn't happen in connection to this that would prompt Dolan to fire them both when you only have a couple games left in the season. If this is performance, is James really living under a rock, not realizing we're in a rebuild? This stuff takes time. What has Jeff Gorton done since he became the full official GM of the Rangers after Glenn Sather? He has been phenomenal. He has easily been one of the better GMs in all the NHL. Has he been perfect? No. But he has been tremendous with plenty of the Rangers drafting. He has made crucial trades, such smart and meticulous trades for the Rangers for years now. And just like he did with Boston, building their core group that you see now with all their main top guys that have been in their playoff runs, Stanley Cup runs the past decade, he was snubbed short of witnessing Boston on the rise. And now the same exact thing happened with the Rangers with this rebuild. And to add a further, John Davidson, who is such a pivotal part of this Rangers organization, not just from his time as a phenomenal goaltender, but as we all know, was a longtime commentator with Sam Rosen, to then leave the Rangers, go on to have greater roles with the St. Louis Blues, help build their core. Ultimately, a big part of their core helped win the Stanley Cup 2 years ago. Same thing then with the Columbus Blue Jackets, building a really strong core there too. Coming to the Rangers, as Steven and I were saying earlier, to really wrap up his career, knowing that he's always been a New York Ranger. That's what he's known for. He loves New York. To come here and hopefully finish his career. A year and a half in as president, James Dolan tells him, hey, you're out of here. That's it. I doubt we'll see James ever. Pardon me. I doubt we will ever see JD connected to the Rangers organization ever again. Not anytime soon. And that is the biggest thing, one of the many things that bothers me. You smack a Ranger alumni who is so widely respected, who is such a phenomenal person inside and out, is disgusting to me. And it just shows you what you can do with money, man. It really overpowers everything. And rational, emotional decisions, that is what led to this tipping point. To say it was just performance is the biggest load of bullshit you can ever tell me. So, Steven, what is your stance on this matter? And what is the numerous theories I know that you've been coming up with since this first parent?
See, earlier this week, I thought the biggest mistake a billionaire made was Bill Gates getting divorced. But James Dolan just trumped that now. James Dolan, his decision makes no sense to me. I have a theory. I don't know if it's true, but looking at what happened this season, this is how I feel. I think it had a little bit to do with performance, but not necessarily where we are in the standings. I think that Jeff Gorton and John Davidson just weren't willing to do what James Dolan asked of them. And that's why he got rid of them. How I see it is this. This is my theory. It's not confirmed. I didn't get this from a source. It's just my own theory that I came up with. Earlier this season, when David Quinn was out with COVID, we had Chris Knobloch behind the bench for 2 weeks. Chris Drury was with him behind the bench, and the Rangers played like a completely different team. They played like a Stanley Cup contender. They were that dominant. I feel that James Dolan wanted to move on from David Quinn, having seen the discrepancy between Quinn behind the bench and Quinn sitting at home. But Jeff Gorton and John Davidson taking Quinn's side, where Chris Drury would have taken Knobloch's side. That's the theory that I have. I don't know if it's true. I don't think David Quinn's going to be here much longer. I think he's going to be the next casualty in this organizational restructure. But a lot will depend on what happens next week. We play our last game on Saturday. Next week will be the exit interviews with all the players. And as we know, exit interviews with players are the biggest aspect when it comes to determining the future of a head coach. In 2013, the Rangers had made the playoffs 3 seasons in a row, made it to the conference final the year prior, and Tortorella was out because the players were done. Looking at how the players performed with Knobloch behind the bench compared to how they performed when Quinn came back, I wouldn't be surprised if the players are at that point now where they are willing to say, we do not feel comfortable playing for this coach anymore. If that's the case, then Quinn will be gone, and there's a pretty good chance that Chris Knobloch will be promoted. And Drury said something earlier today that they need to find people for Hartford, which only makes sense if there are vacancies in Hartford. And as far as I know, there's no vacancy in Hartford.
And you'd have to think that no one's actually getting fired, but that people would be moving up, if anything.
Yeah, so Knobloch moving up and becoming the Rangers head coach makes sense. He has a little bit of NHL experience coaching the Flyers, of course. He has done a really good job in Hartford. So it could be that they're just more comfortable with that guy behind the bench. And not that David Quinn has been awful. He's had some baffling decisions, yes. But I think David Quinn, for him to be the Rangers coach long term, he had to develop as well. He had to improve his and change the way he coaches as well. And I don't think David Quinn has changed as a coach at all in the last 3 years. I think he's still the same college coach he was 3 years ago. But, that's just a theory. I'm shocked that Davidson and Gorton are out. I'm happy that Chris Drury has taken over and not Mark Messier, because that was my biggest fear when I heard about them getting fired, that either Glenn Sather or Mark Messier was going to come in and was going to ruin our entire rebuild, because I want someone with experience. Chris Drury has worked his way up the last 10 years. Ever since he retired from hockey, he worked his way up to where he is right now. That's how you do it.
Brilliant mind. He's been There's a reason why he's been so sought after. I'm sure you guys know this by now, but Drury has been getting offers left and right for actual GM roles between the Panthers and Penguins. I think Buffalo too. A lot, and he's turned them all down. And there's a clear connection that Drury has turned them down. One, he grew up a Rangers fan. That's definitely a caveat. Kind of like the same thing with Adam Fox. He got to play with the Rangers towards the end of his career, was solid with them as well. But you can tell he's always been wanting to be ingrained with the Rangers. And as soon as he came here, he has not wanted to leave. And if he did, he would have taken one of those hires a while ago already. And I think he kind of knew this one now with Dolan, that a door would open at some point. It was just a matter of when and where. And clearly that time came yesterday. And I'm excited for him. I really am. It's just, I'm honestly just more concerned about the fact of who you're kicking out. It's not like this to say Glenn Sather when he was still GM, when all he was known for during the 2010s and before that was really just blowing up this team. This was not a rebuild. It was constantly trying to reaffirm, getting rid of any type of farm you had for, grizzled vets that are probably past their prime, trying to keep your playoff hopes alive. A lot of things that we saw with Jim Rutherford recently until he was done with the Penguins. And then when you look at Drury coming in now, I love that mind, but Jeff Gorton, he's not going to be out on the street lawn. Are you joking? This guy's a phenomenal mind. For all we know, he could be going to a rival before we know it, and I wouldn't blame him whatsoever. But he's an intelligent man, and that is more so why we're all just kind of baffled and taken back. We're not bothered by the Chris Drury aspect, as you're alluding to right now. It is the fact of who you kicked out to bring in Chris Drury. So Drury has a lot of big shoes to fill. I'm confident in him. Whether he stays both president and GM has yet to be determined. But, Steven, I would love to hear your stance on the whole Mark Messier matter because, again, as Ranger fans, we love Mark Messier. There's no doubting that. He will always go down as one of the best, if not the greatest Ranger legend that you could ever think of when you first think of the Rangers. But there's a clear difference with being a Rangers legend and a guy who's established. Even like John Davidson, there was worries for a while. My father would always quote this on saying he doesn't know if JD would ever come in the reins to work for the Rangers again, like in a management role, because he doesn't want to tarnish his legacy. But the difference is that JD has actually worked himself up. He has plenty of experience under his belt, being a higher up, whether it's a GM or a president, that he has been with the Blues and the CBJ most recently. So let me hear your thoughts about Mark Messier in detail, because I would love to explain his comments that he did on the Michael Kay show yesterday at the time of recording this.
Yeah, so before I go into the whole Mark Messier thing, the other thing I wanted to highlight is that, yes, Jeff Gorton has done a great job when it comes to trading and, signing the right players, and our draft picks have looked really good. But there has been an issue the last 2 years that has been brushed aside by a lot of fans as, it's just a player having an issue. It's just an incident with one player.
Yeah, I know what you're going to say.
And you go, it's an issue with a second player. And then it happened a third time. And you know where I'm going with this. We had the Elias Anderson situation. Then we had the Vitaly Kravtsov situation where you complained about a lack of communication. Then you had Capo Caca, who was very critical of David Quinn in a Finnish podcast. This year we have Julien Gauthier, who's clearly not used the right way. Brendan Lemieux is asking for a trade. We've had the Anthony D'Angelo debacle where he and Georgiev got into a fight. And all of a sudden you have a player earning $4 million on the taxi squad. All those things combined, like each of these things individually, separate in a vacuum, isn't really reason to criticize your general manager. But if you put all those things together and realize that all those things happen in the span of 24 months, there are some underlying issues that might have played into this decision as well. Because at the end of the day, you want to keep your players happy. Your players are your product. Your players on the ice are what's going to win you a cup, is what's going to get you into playoffs. Those are your money makers. Your general manager, by proxy, is making you money because he's putting the best team together. But it's much easier to replace a general manager than it is to replace a player like Panarin or Zibanejad if that player has an issue with how the organization is run. Anyway, when it comes to Messier, I just want to start by saying, I know fans love him, and there's no denying that he changed the course of this franchise when he arrived in 1991 as a player. There's no denying that. I'm not going to argue against that at all. However, we're talking about the job that he wanted to be president of the New York Rangers, a $1 billion company. Their net worth is $1.6 billion. You don't just walk into a job like that where you are the president of a $1 billion company without any experience. Ever since he retired, when did he retire? 2004?
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. He's been retired for 17 years. Ever since he retired, he has done zero work in any of the positions that could have prepared him for this. He was a consultant, which is easy. Anyone can be a consultant because there's no risk. There's no responsibility. There's no accountability. Yeah, you can say, I would have done it differently. But if you're wrong, no one's going to fire you. Being a consultant doesn't make you qualified. You need someone for a role like this with experience either in the position or in the organization, preferably both. You cannot just pick someone from the street, which Messier technically is, pick someone up from the street and put him in a position to be president of your $1 billion company. It's not an entry-level position. It's a position you need to grow into, or a position you need to have done for a different organization, in my opinion. And Chris Drury has done what I would have expected Mark Messier to do. Chris Drury has worked his way up ever since he retired from hockey. He was an assistant general manager. He was involved in player development. He was involved in scouting. He was the general manager of Team USA. Then he was promoted to associate general manager last year, and now he's general manager / president. He has worked to get to where he is right now. Whereas Mark Messier sounds like a guy who just sits back and expects things to come to him because he won the Rangers a cup in 1994. And that's just not how it works. Just because you were a good player on the ice doesn't mean you'll be successful in a front office job or an upper management.
Wayne Gretzky. Let's think about Wayne Gretzky for a second.
Look at Wayne Gretzky as a head coach in Arizona. It was a disaster because being on the ice is not the same as being behind the bench. And that's just the head coach position. We're talking about being the president of a company where you have people reporting to you. You have to make decisions about who to promote, who to fire, who to replace. It's not the same as even being a head coach. If Mark Messier had done anything remotely organizational after his retirement, I wouldn't be this direct about being against it. But he has done nothing. Ever since he retired, he's done nothing. He hasn't had a job in the organization or in any other NHL organization. He's been a consultant. That's it.
Here, not to cut you off, I just want to add here quick. What should really be noted about Messier too is how he was on the Michael Kay show yesterday at the time of recording this, guys. It's either going to be a day or two removed from time you watch this and listen. But Michael Kay show, they were asking him, his stances on everything. And they asked, what do they know about Chris Drury and his role? And Messier said how he really doesn't know much of anything about Chris. They played against each other towards the end of Messier's career when he was no longer with the Rangers, and that they've interacted slightly. Sometimes he thinks he will be fine. But then when he was asked if he believed that the James Dolan firing situation had anything to do with the Tom Wilson statement and all that, he said, he has no right to comment because he has been out of touch with the Rangers for years. So that, in my mind, is also a little alarming because if Messier would be in a position where he does become president, and who knows, maybe he still will be. At this rate, I'm not in favor for it because, as Steven is saying here, we have our natural concerns with the lack of experience. But if you do bring Mess in, He hasn't even been following the Rangers on the daily or even close to the past numerous years. In my mind, that's also a big red flag. You should at least have an idea of what you're getting yourself into instead of having to just look at the numbers right away and basically meet everyone for the first time outside of saying your hellos on alumni nights, once or twice a year. So that, in my mind, is another big red flag on the whole Messier thing. We love Mess, but again, I get it that the guy was a leader. He was a captain of this team. He's phenomenal. We all love him. But as Steven has kept saying, there's a drastic difference between being a phenomenal player and being a phenomenal president, anything in upper management. That does take years of experience, and I'm beyond grateful that the Rangers do have a guy by the name of Chris Drury who has spent the last decade plus doing nothing but work his ass off to be in the position that he's now currently in.
Yeah. And again, this has nothing to do with Messier as a person or Messier did as a player, but there's a Dutch football coach who years ago said something that has always stuck with me. And it loosely translates to a good horse does not automatically make a good jockey. And that hits the nail on the head. You cannot expect someone to be a good head coach just because he was a good player. And the same thing goes for general manager, director of player development. And yeah, there are some examples of people who have been put in that position who have actually succeeded. But Mark Messier hasn't done anything hockey-related since he retired. Yeah, sometimes he shows up at Madison Square Garden, and the one thing he's really good at is waving at fans, because that's basically what he does. And the guy should have a statue in front of Madison Square Garden for what he did for this team. But he's not fit to be president of $1 billion company. Then again, James Dolan is the owner. If he makes the call, it's his money, it's his organization. So, I mean, my opinion at the end of the day doesn't mean anything. I'm not the one who owns the Rangers. But if it was me, I would want something in that position who has done it before or who has proven at different levels that they're capable of those things. I know Glenn Sather is now involved. And I hope
helping guide Drury.
Yeah, he's going to guide Drury, and I hope, and I'm happy with that because Glenn Sather has been in that position. I hope Glenn Sather guides him when it comes to the business side of the job. Just leave Chris Drury to do the operational side.
Yep.
That's all I care about because Chris Drury has been groomed by Jeff Gorton. I don't think Chris Drury is going to be drastically different from Jeff Gorton. Having Drury in place softens the blow for me. Yes, I was a little bit shocked that Gorton was gone, but Drury replacing him makes me feel better. John Davidson being gone, it doesn't really bother me that much, to be honest. Yeah, he's a great guy. I met him a few times. He's a great guy. But I always had the feeling that when JD came in 2019, it was never really clear who made the decision. It's like we had two captains trying to steer the ship. And in my opinion, that caused more confusion than it was actually helpful. So having Drury now taking up both those positions, having one person in charge of all of it, I think is a better structure to have.
I think it's a smarter role overall. Now that you say that, because JD, as much as I love him and I thought he was fine with it, let me put it this way. I don't think JD did anything wrong during his time with the Rangers as president. But maybe there was a slight conflict of interest with Gorton at times, because you're right. Those are two guys that normally do call a lot of the shots, and Gorton is an aggressive GM, and at least he's very meticulous about his decision making. We know this, and Gorton and JD is a guy who normally runs a lot of the show. So that's a great point. And when you look in now, Drury being both GM and president. I will say, as kind of bizarre as this may seem, I am more comfortable with that, at least at this point in time, until we maybe find out that a new president comes in place or something. But as long as he can handle the pressure, by all means, let him guide himself then, so he doesn't have to worry about a straight direction from someone still ahead of him.
See, what's weird to me, and this is how I feel, is that I think there was still room for JD if Drury is the general manager. I think having a president who's hands-on on the operational side of things is fine if you have a general manager who's still learning things about the position. If you have someone who's just starting as a general manager. But Jeff Gorton has done this before. When you have a general manager like Jeff Gorton, you need a president who's not a hands-on guy, someone who sits back, lets things happen, and intervenes when needed. But like I said, the last 2 years have been a little bit of a mess. And we tend to focus on the positives, all the trades we've mentioned and signing Panarin and somehow managing to get Adam Fox and drafting guys like Kravtsov and Lundqvist and Miller. All great. But it has been a little bit of a mess in this organization with how players have walked away from this team, how players have openly criticized the coaching, the management, the way they are allowed to rehab from injuries. So it's not like Gorton and JD were perfect. They definitely had some. There were some red flags, not to the point where I would have made the decision to fire them, but I can understand it to a point. But with Drury in place now, I'm confident that the rebuild is still on. If Messier was in charge, I was going to be terrified that we were going to trade Lafreniere for Ryan Reeves or something. Because the first thing that went through my head when I heard that Messier was one of the front runners for the president's position, the first thing that went through my head was Tony Amonte. In 1994, the Rangers traded Tony Amonte for, I don't even know who they traded him for, like Steve Larmer and Stefan Matteau. Who was the second guy they got from Chicago?
Oh yeah. I think it was Larmer and Matteau.
Yeah, Larmer and Matteau. They got Larmer and Matteau for Tony Amonte, which in hindsight, it's fine. We won a cup, so it worked. But if you look at it from a distance, and if you look at it long term, the Rangers gave up a really good forward that they could have used for a decade. And they got two players that were gone within like a year and a half. And I was just afraid that if Messier was in charge, we were going to give up our future for a quick run. And if that run doesn't pan out, then you're fucked. If the Rangers don't win that cup in 1994, if they lose to the Devils, which it's not unrealistic. They were down 3-2 in the conference final. If they lose to the Devils in 94, then no one's talking about Neil Smith. No one's talking about Mark Messier. Brian Leach, Mike Richter, Adam Graves don't have their numbers up in the rafters. None of that happens. And yeah, I know, ironic that I mentioned the Tony Amonte trade because Stefan Matteau scored in Game 7 against the Devils. But bad trades can still look like good ones if you win the cup. On the other end of the spectrum, good trades can look like bad ones if you don't win the cup. The Keith Yandel trade, in my experience, was a good trade.
Well, I just want to add too, Steven. It's true. Look, when you're going all in on a cup year, all hell breaks loose. You tend to you put the future aside because you're in on the now. It happens every year. This is what the Rangers were notorious for during Glenn Sather's time in the 2010s. Every single year at the deadline, it's like if the Rangers did not make a drastic move for a veteran, you're like, what the hell are they doing? If you look at the most recent Cup winner in the New Jersey Devils, they gave a first-round pick for Barclay Goodrow. They also gave up not just a first-round pick, but a fantastic prospect and foot to the Devils for Blake Coleman. And look, that worked out in the end. They won the Stanley Cup, and those guys have been with them still. It is working out for them, but they gave up a hell of a lot of their future. Yeah. Now, they're in a unique position because they're still younger. It's not like that they're one of the oldest teams in the league. They're benefiting from this. They made smart moves while still overpaying. But the point is that this happens all the time. So there are always going to be those risk factors in. And if the Rangers found themselves in a position where, say, Messier or whoever, it doesn't matter, anyone that would come in now as president or GM and blow shit up, go for Alexander Ovechkin, but you give up Alexis Lafreniere, Capo Caco. It's not going to do you any good. Even if you win the cup, it's going to feel so good in that moment. But is that really worthwhile in the end when you risk having a potential dynasty on your hands? And I don't think that's an exaggeration when you look at how this team has been building.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
I'm going to paint two scenarios, and I want you to choose. Scenario A, you win the cup in 2022, miss the playoffs for 10 years, and then win another cup in 2032. Scenario A. Or scenario B, You make the playoffs every year. You're a contender for over a decade. You make the final 3 times. You only win once.
Contender every year. Because
even though you only end up with 1 cup.
Only one cup, because it is damn difficult to win a Stanley Cup. Don't get me wrong. But I much rather follow my Rangers and watch intense hockey every single year for a decade straight and get this close. It'll rip me to shreds, but by God, I will be watching every single year. For me personally, as a fan, I love this rebuild, but my interest is naturally drawn away as the season gets to the latter half, because I can only go so long knowing that the only focus on watching these games is that you're watching for the young development, which is fun, but it's developing. And, for a young fan like myself, I don't just want that, but I'm thinking of myself when I was even younger and it was playoff run after playoff run. It's just the intensity was there. You love that. You feed off that. That's why you're a hockey fan. If you don't get that constant reassurance at the end of the day, if you have a decade off of no playoff hockey, that could potentially ruin a man's fandom. And maybe that's more of a casual fan outlook for other people. I understand that, but it's a reality. I feel like you're putting far too much risk. The amount of growth that you would have within an organization and with your fan base would be second to none. If you have a decade's worth of playoff runs, win the Stanley Cup once, but you make it to the dance 3 times. That, in my mind, is an unbelievably professional team that has a constant winning mentality, but is able to keep it and sustain it over a 10-year span.
Yeah. So the Rangers won the Cup in 94, right?
Yes.
In 1994, there was a new sitcom that started, Friends.
Yes.
if you watch like the first 5 seasons of Friends, there's New York Ranger references sprinkled around. They're going to a Rangers game. Joey wears a Brian Leetch jersey. There's Joey and Chandler have hockey sticks in their apartment. If you watch How I Met Your Mother, a sitcom located in New York City, is there any Rangers reference? Any? There's some Canucks references because one of the characters is Canadian.
Yep.
But it was different. The 90s were different. The Rangers won a cup in 94 and everyone was talking about it. Pop culture was talking about the New York Rangers. That's what I'm missing. I want that again. I want the Rangers to have that for a decade. I want what the Bruins have. The Bruins that Jeff Gorton put together over the last 10 years have made the Stanley Cup final, and this is why I chose them as a scenario B. They made the Stanley Cup final 3 times, 2011, 2013, 2019.
Yep.
They only won 1 cup, but they've been contenders every year. It must have been a lot of fun for Bruins fans to watch them the last decade.
It's been phenomenal. I remember the Stanley Cup win like it was yesterday. The Tim Thomas story coming out of nowhere, the young group finally getting together. And when you look back, it's crazy that they have not won in basically a decade now. When you look at how strong their core has been, they did that without Brad Marchand being the Brad Marchand that we know him today, that we all absolutely love to hate, but you love him if he's on your team. That line with Pasta and Bergeron, it's some of the best in hockey. So
now imagine how good they would have been if they didn't trade away Tyler Seguin for spare parts.
Oh, they made let's not get on a tangent with the stupid trades Boston has made. Okay, trust me, we can go down the list. But my point though is that you want that decade. That is what builds a fandom. Because I would not be talking to you today if the Rangers did not have the run like they did in the 2010s. Yeah. I wouldn't be here. I started following the Rangers heavily around 2010. I was starting to really get into them, but 2011 was really when it started, like the year as we got into losing to the Devils in the conference finals. That was it. That was it. That was the first season I watched every single game for the Rangers. It has not skipped a game. It has not skipped a beat since.
But that was a great season in many ways. The fact that the Rangers were in the Winter Classic gave them a little bit more exposure. They swept the Flyers. They had some great memorable games. Chris Kreider debut in the playoffs. But the 2 scenarios I painted earlier, the way I feel, the contender for a decade is what you get when you stick with Chris Drury. Winning a cup, maybe win a cup now, but then suck for 10 years. That's what I'm afraid of if a guy like Messier is in charge. Because he will be chasing the success. And if you look at the Rangers in the 90s, there were decisions made by Neil Neil Smith, the general manager, that were sort of forced on him by Mark Messier. Mark Messier impacted more than just what happened on the ice. And what did we get for it? Well, we got a conference final in 97. That's about it. We had 3 fun years of Wayne Gretzky. The guy put up 90 points in his late 30s. That was fun. But was there any success? No. And then we got to the dark ages. You had 7 years without a playoff appearance. I don't want that. I want to be a contender every year. I want to make the playoffs every year. I can live with a first or second round exit once in a while if I know that I'm going to be back next year. I don't want to have a team full of mercenaries. I want to have a team full of players that we drafted, that we developed, that have our identity. And if the Rangers need to do one thing this summer. They need to fill out their team and balance it a little bit, because it is skill heavy.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, and I think when you talk about skill heavy, we should also recognize that we don't want a goon. We're not in favor. We went over this last episode of having a guy that's just a pylon that will do nothing but throw his fist. You want that agitation, but it's funny because when we talked about the Tkachuk brothers, and we didn't even mention Brady, I would be in so favor of either of them. Those are 2 prime examples of guys you absolutely love to have on your team, especially for a team young, promising, going into hopefully a decade's worth of playoff runs. Like, those are the guys, 1,000%. Now, Can the Rangers build that with themselves with guys like Will Cooley, a 19-year-old who's with the Wolfpack right now, who I just saw at a fight the other day? Sure, maybe. Who knows? But you want to find that balance. And I do think the Rangers are going to do that. And I would be lying to you if I said I'm not more intrigued about this offseason now than I would have been if JD and Gorton were still there, because there's a lot of uncertainty now. You know, if this is by any stretch of the imagination based off of performance, which we are not under the belief it is, but if that is in fact the case, what kind of moves are the Rangers going to make? Are they really going to go all in on possibly another big center? Even though as well as Ryan Strome and Mika Zibanejad have done, do they want to take a step further and go for a guy who's dominant on both ends of the ice? Like, will they go in all on a Sasha Barkov, who I doubt, given how smart their GM is? Bill Zito, really smart guy, or Jack Eichel. Jack Eichel, is that a guy? Or are you going to kind of do what Tampa did that we started to get a taste of with getting those grittier guys, but they're younger? There are plenty of guys in the league right now that I could see the Rangers target. Maybe you overpay a little bit. Maybe you give up a first-round pick for 2 years from now or something, because you know it's going to be a latter half first-round pick for a guy that'll probably be on your third line, could be on your second line, but it's a pretty balanced 2-way forward to bring some grit. Are you going to add maybe to the blue line a little bit more? Because I know that there have been reports of the Rangers showing interest in maybe another top 4, top 6 defenseman with Brendan Smith, a future uncertain, and you're probably not going to do all rookies next year for the most part, like having Niels Lundqvist in the line of Zach Jones. Like, there's uncertainties there. So they want to round out this lineup. And I will just say one more thing too, and I don't think anything's going to change. I still believe that his contract will be bought out or he's traded, but you have to wonder how this affects Tony DeAngelo, because Jeff Gorton is the guy, as we all know, that kicked Tony out the door. So is there a different impression with someone like Drury now, knowing that James Dolan may very well, and same thing with Glenn Sather, as they advocate, they want grit on this team. And as much as I know a lot of you guys are going to be saying, I hate Tony DeAngelo, whether that's because of him as a player or as a person, I probably can get an understanding of which side of the coin you're on. But still, Tony brought flair to this team, and there was no doubting that. You'd have to wonder, what would have happened if this whole Wilson situation, I can bet you all the money in the world, Tony would have dropped the gloves. He would have been drooling out the mouth for that moment. And those are the kind of players the Rangers need. I'm not saying that they're going to keep Tony, but he is someone you have to think about, a guy who is highly talented. Maybe he's pretty one-dimensional. He's not great defensively. We know that. But he's a prime example of what the Rangers need. They need that grit in their lineup, but a young grit, and a grit that is not going to cost you suspension after suspension. You know, he's hot-headed. We know that. So he's an interesting factor. We won't get into him. I just want to throw that out there because I'm curious if the Gorton factor changes everything. But it's guys like him in the sense of younger-minded, like the Tkachuk brothers, to name a few also, those are the kind of guys the Rangers should try to be singling out if they're going to single out any type of player.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see what they're going to come up with. I personally think that the trade we're going to see is not going to be for a big superstar. I think we're going to see a Gabrick type trade where we trade a big guy, like a big player, like Buchnevich, for a package of 2 or 3 role players in your bottom 9 to fill out the team a little bit, to give your team a little balance. Who those players will be, I don't know, but we'll see. Drury is in charge now, and I have faith in Drury. I'm happy. I'm happy that he's the one taking over. And we'll have to wait and see. But this whole situation, man, I keep coming back to this. Couldn't this have waited a week?
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing. That's what completely contradicts the belief that what has transpired with the statement has nothing to do with this. Frank Saravelli came out.
If this is performance-based, why do it now? There's 3
why be so urgent?
Eliminated.
Why be so emotional about it? Frank Saravelli for TSN came out with a statement when this all broke down. And in a nutshell, he was saying how he was hearing things that apparently JD and Gorton were kind of running away from the statement where they basically knew about it, but they didn't say that they knew about it until after the statement came out. So there's a lot of conflicting reports here in my mind. For the common consensus is that James Dolan was the one driving this. Okay, if that's the case, fine. But you have to really wonder if that was not a factor at all for JD and Gorton. Why are you going to make a completely emotional and, to an extent, I would say even irresponsible decision on Dolan's part, for sure, to do this? Only a couple games. It completely eliminates the whole aspect of caring about PR as well. Like, of trying to have a good look. You shocked the hockey world yesterday. You had non-hockey fans talking about this. It didn't matter what you were, as long as you knew in a nutshell who the New York Rangers were, you knew how drastic and how insane yesterday was. Yeah. Firing your president and GM, who are established people in the NHL.
Speaking of how shocking this is, when Elliot Friedman tweeted this out, he got calls from other general managers telling him it's not true.
That's my point. That's exactly my point. Who knew this was going to happen?
He got calls from other general managers saying this is not true, and then those general managers called around and got back to him 5 minutes later saying, "Sorry, we just heard it from other people." It's ridiculous. Nobody expected this. It's a crazy situation. It's the last thing I wanted my team to deal with in the middle of a rebuild, but it is what it is.
It is what it is. That's the best way to kind of wrap up this episode of Rangers Review, because, look, at the end of the day, we're fans. We're emotional. I was emotional. I was saying a lot of explicit things. I'm not going to lie to you. It's kind of funny to me. It feels like James Dolan finally gets the New York Knicks figured out after having 8 years straight without a playoff caliber team above 500. The Knicks have their first winning season in 8 years after James Dolan being notorious of the guy that does not put his fingers in the hair of the Rangers because he doesn't know a lick about hockey. He'll gladly pay those checks, but he thinks he knows anything about basketball, and all Knicks fans hate him for it. So the one year James Dolan decides not to touch the New York Knicks any longer, he goes in and does this to the New York Rangers. Coincidence? I think so. So that's kind of my final statement on it. And one last thing regarding the mayhem for the Rangers and the game, I just want to share my brief thoughts, is that this was crazy. I did not expect the guys to drop the gloves right in the beginning. That was surprising me. I had no clue what retaliation we were going to see. I expected retaliation, but the Rangers, they made a statement, and the NHL ate it up for breakfast. This is what they want. They want everyone to see must-see TV. Let's watch the Rangers, who are out of the playoffs against the Capitals team, locked in on NBC night, Wednesday night rivalry. Everyone watch it, fights left and right. Most of the fights weren't even that good. There were a couple of decent ones. It was just a statement game. The Rangers had to show that as a team that they were here. We would be defending guys like Buchnevich, same thing with Panarin, most notably, and they did a good job at that. They did. I'm proud of the team that they defended themselves, but it's a joke. You have the NHL, the Department of Player Safety, that does not suspend Tom Wilson, even for that damn game. And because of that, they allow the exact opposite of what they quote unquote are trying to eliminate. Fighting in the game is something the NHL is trying to get rid of, yet they are so desperate for dollars that they need to make sure that that game happened last night the way it did. That shows you the hypocrisy with this league, with the Department of Player Safety and Gary Bettman more than anything. They are complete hypocrites. They want to help players. They want to get rid of CT. They want to get rid of fighting in the game. They would not have allowed yesterday to transpire, and yet they did. Shows you a lot about where the current mindsets are really at and how much of a fools a lot of us maybe have felt like for a while. Going to be very interesting to see how things transition now when they're with the bigger market for the most part with ESPN and TNT next year for the foreseeable future. Normally, what draws people into hockey, anyone you ask, at least from a North American standpoint, is fighting. Every single person I know that is a casual hockey fan is like, oh, I love the fights. And I'm looking at them like, fighting isn't even a thing in today's NHL. It's such a has-been, but that is what draws people. And at the end of the day, all the NHL gives a damn about is the dollars. That's all sports gives a damn about. So don't forget that, guys. We don't have sports leagues because of everyone being diehard sports fans. No, we have it because it's about money. It's a money's game through and through. It's marketing is what can we do to give the fans a good experience. But in a nutshell, we get loaded at the same time. The NHL has sucked with its marketing. So now they're trying to flip-flop and be completely contradictory to what they stand for. And they're going to ignore this. They're going to act like the game kind of never happened. But at the same time, they're going to be proud that it did, knowing that they got the type of revenue last night in the game that they did. They're just complete hypocrites. They're all just complete hypocrites.
On national television.
On national television. Absolutely. I don't think that this would have happened if this wasn't a rivalry night with everything that transpired on NBC Sports. There's no doubt. If we're gonna be done with NBC, let's go out with a bang, right?
Yeah.
And that's really all, folks. That's all. I'm done. I'm done, Steven. We're over this. We're not even going to talk about. We're going to wait. We're going to wait to talk about the Rangers again. Next time we will do an episode will be after I think what would be best is once the season's actually done. They only have 3 games left. We'll hold off until there. So Rangers fans, I appreciate you chiming in. I hope you guys enjoyed what was supposed to be a half-hour episode got doubled because we're just ranting here. But I would love to know your thoughts in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube and if you're watching this on Spotify, SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for that as well. Again, throughout the summer, we're going to be kind of rebranding and changing a lot of things from the YouTube and podcast format, really gelling more into one, getting things kind of better. So you guys have a better expectation in the offseason going into the draft and next season. So stay tuned for all that, guys. But other than that, let's go Rangers, baby. Steven, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, it's been a weird week, but I'm happy that we still have a competent man in charge in Drury.
Yes, praise Chris Drury. He knew his time would come. I don't think he expected his time to come right now. I think he was still probably a year away. I think would be fair.
And that's the thing with Chris Drury. He has connections all over the league. He was a well-respected player. He's a Hobie Baker winner. He's won a Stanley Cup. He's played for different organizations. He has connections everywhere. He was the general manager of Team USA, so he spoke to all these general managers in the NHL about their players and how he wanted to use them. So the connections are there. I'm not worried about that at all. We'll see how it goes. I think we'll have a better understanding of what direction we're going towards if after we've seen his first free agent signing and his first trade.
Yeah, and I'm excited for it though. A part of me kind of likes the uncertainty. It's like we've known the direction this team has been going down for a bit, so now you throw this curveball at me. Okay, all right.
Can you imagine after all this went down if the Rangers win the draft lottery? Can you imagine?
No, I can't. I really can't. The NHL, that would be the biggest smack in the NHL's face more than anything, I think. That's what that would be.
Can you imagine? Let's go for it. Let's go for that lottery pick.
Okay, let's lose the next 2 games. Let's get a smidgen closer. Again, probably not going to happen. But one thing is certain: the Rangers' future.
I said that last year, Tyler, and I said it in 2019.
Listen. I get it.
I'm not going to say it again. I don't want to be wrong again.
I don't know. I think the magic's gone because Gorton's gone. I do. I really do. But regardless, the Rangers have a bright future. How bright is it? I don't know. This feels like we're doing a comedy, like a sitcom. Let's wait and find out next season. I have no clue, but I'm excited. I'm intrigued. They've left me with that at least. And Chris Drury, we trust. And Steven, that's going to do it for this episode. So again, thank you guys. Sorry for the prolonged delay here, but I hope you all have a great day. And Steven, let's go Rangers.
Let's go Rangers.